Hey everyone, and welcome back to Talk Tensors, the podcast that breaks down the latest and greatest in machine learning research. Today we're diving into a paper that really grabbed our attention. It's called How Do Generative Models Draw a Software Engineer? A case study on Stable Diffusion Bias.
Yes, this study really shines a light on an interesting aspect of AI image generation that we often just take for granted, the potential for inherent bias.
Right, we often think of algorithms as being totally neutral.
Yeah.
But this paper reveals that even cutting-edge AI models like Stable Diffusion can reflect and even amplify societal biases.
Exactly. And this is particularly relevant, in the context of software engineering, a field that already struggles with diversity and representation.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with Stable Diffusion, can you give us a quick rundown of what it is and why it's important?
Absolutely. So imagine you could type in a description like a software engineer working on a complex coding project and have a computer instantly generate a photorealistic image. Based on those words, that's the power of Stable Diffusion.
Okay.
It's a powerful open source model that's revolutionizing the way we create and interact with images.
Okay. That's pretty impressive. But how does this paper tie into the idea of bias?
Well, the researchers took 3 versions of Stable Diffusion, SD2, SDXL, and SD3, and used them to generate over 6,700 images related to various software engineering tasks.
Okay.
Then they analyzed these images for gender and ethnic representation.
And what did they find? Was there evidence of bias in these generated images?
Unfortunately, yes. All 3 models showed a significant increase in gender bias when the prompts specifically included the phrase software engineer.
Interesting. Can you give us some specific examples of this bias?
Sure. For instance, ST2 went from generating images of women 47% of the time to a whopping 98% male representation when software engineer was included in the prompt.
Wow, that's a huge jump. It sounds like the model is associating the term software engineer with a predominantly male image.
Exactly. And it's not just a matter of the prompt, even without the software engineer phrase, SDXL. One of the models tested already generated mostly male images.
So there's some baseline bias baked into the model itself.
Yeah.
Even before we introduce specific prompts.
That's right. And this likely stems from the datasets used to train these models.
Okay.
One of the primary datasets, LAON5B, is known to be heavily English-centric, which could contribute to a skewed representation of software engineers from diverse cultural backgrounds.
That makes sense if the training data is already biased. It's no surprise that the model reflects those biases in its output.
Precisely. And it's crucial to remember that these models are trained on massive amounts of data, including text and images scraped from the internet.
Right.
So they're essentially learning from the patterns and biases that already exist in our digital world.
So in a way, these AI models are holding up a mirror to society, reflecting back the biases we've inadvertently embedded in our digital footprint.
Exactly. And that's why this research is so important. It forces us to confront these biases and think critically about how we develop and use these powerful AI tools.
So let's delve a bit deeper into those findings you mentioned. Gender bias was a significant issue. What about ethnic representation? Did the researchers analyze that as well?
They did. They used 5 categories: Arab, Asian, Black, White, and Other.
Okay.
Well, ST3, the newest model, showed slightly more balanced representation of white and Asian figures compared to the older versions. All the models significantly underrepresented Black and Arab individuals.
That's concerning.
Yeah.
It suggests that these models might perpetuate existing inequalities and contribute to a lack of diversity in how we visualize software engineers.
Absolutely. And what's even more interesting is that this bias wasn't limited to tasks that we typically associate with coding.
What?
Even when the prompts described activities like providing support or helping others, the model still skewed heavily towards male images when the phrase software engineer was included.
It seems like the model has learned to associate the software engineer label with a male stereotype, regardless of the specific task being performed.
Yes, and that raises important questions about how these AI systems learn and generalize information.
Right.
It highlights the need to be more mindful of the data we use to train them and to develop methods for mitigating bias in their outputs.
Okay, so we've established that there's a significant problem with bias in AI image generation, especially when it comes to portraying software engineers. Before we jump into potential solutions, I think it would be helpful to understand the historical context of this issue. After all, bias in technology is not a new phenomenon.
You're absolutely right. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll take a journey through the history of technology, exploring how bias has manifested in everything from early computing to social media algorithms.
That's fascinating.
This historical perspective will help us understand the roots of the problem and how it has evolved over time.
I'm eager to learn more about that historical context. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back to Talk Tensors. Before the break, we were discussing a paper that highlights the issue of bias in AI image generation, particularly when it comes to portraying software engineers. To better understand this, we're going to take a step back and explore the historical context of bias in technology.
That's a great approach. It's fascinating how this bias we're seeing in AI models today is really an echo of historical patterns in technology. If we look back at the evolution of computing, we can trace a consistent trend of underrepresentation and exclusion.
Can you give some specific examples of that? Where do we start seeing this pattern emerge?
Well, let's go back to the early days of computing, during World War II.
Okay.
The codebreakers, who played a pivotal role in cracking the Enigma code, were predominantly women, yet their contributions were largely overshadowed and forgotten as the field progressed.
That's a striking example.
Yeah.
It seems like there was a missed opportunity to establish a more inclusive foundation for the tech industry right from the start.
Exactly. And as the tech industry boomed in the latter half of the 20th century, it became increasingly male-dominated. The image of the lone genius coder, often portrayed as a white male working tirelessly in a dimly lit room, became a pervasive stereotype.
Ah, yes, the classic Silicon Valley archetype. And that image has certainly permeated popular culture through movies, TV shows, and even stock photos.
Right, and this brings us back to the challenge of training AI models. If the data sets they learn from are already skewed towards these stereotypical representations, it's no surprise that the models themselves will reflect those biases. It's like teaching a child to draw, using only pictures of apples. They might become very good at drawing apples, but they'll have a limited understanding of the vast diversity of fruits that exist.
That's a great analogy. So these AI models are, in a sense, inheriting the biases embedded in the data they're trained on. They're learning from the patterns and representations that we as a society have created and perpetuated over time.
Precisely, and the implications of this are significant. These AI-generated images are being used everywhere from websites and advertising to educational materials.
It's alarming to think that these images could be subtly shaping our perceptions of who belongs in certain roles or fields. Imagine a world where all the images you see of doctors are male, or all the images of teachers are female. It would create a very distorted view of reality.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the danger we face with AI image generation. If we don't actively address these biases, these images have the potential to influence our beliefs, our choices, and even our aspirations.
So what can we do about it?
Yeah.
How do we break free from this cycle of bias that seems to be ingrained in both the history of technology and the data that fuels AI?
Well, the paper we're discussing today offers some potential solutions. One approach is to focus on creating more diverse and representative training data sets. This means actively seeking out images that showcase a wider range of genders, ethnicities, and cultural backgrounds.
It's like expanding that child's artistic palette beyond just apples.
Yeah.
Give them access to a rainbow of colors, shapes, and textures, and they'll be able to create a far richer and more nuanced world.
Exactly. But it's not just about quantity, it's also about quality. We need to ensure that the images we use are authentic, accurate, and free from harmful stereotypes.
Because a data set full of images of women coding, but all wearing pink and smiling sweetly at the camera, isn't exactly promoting a balanced view, is it?
You hit the nail on the head. We need to move beyond tokenism and strive for genuine representation that captures the full spectrum of human diversity.
So diverse data sets are crucial, but are there other tools or techniques we can use to tackle bias in AI image generation?
Absolutely. Another promising avenue is the development of bias detection tools. Imagine a system that could analyze an AI-generated image and flag any potential biases similar to how spell check identifies errors in our writing.
That would be incredibly useful. It would be like having a pop-up that says, hey, this image seems to be reinforcing a harmful stereotype. You might want to reconsider your prompt or choose a different image.
Exactly. Such a tool could empower creators to be more mindful of the images they're using and help mitigate the spread of bias at the source.
This all sounds incredibly promising, but I imagine there are also challenges to implementing these solutions. Building diverse data sets takes time, effort, and resources. And developing effective bias detection tools requires sophisticated algorithms and a deep understanding of how bias manifests in visual imagery.
You're absolutely right. It's not a quick fix, but it's an essential endeavor. We need to invest in research, development, and collaboration to create a future where AI image generation is a tool for inclusivity and not exclusion.
Okay. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the alarming findings of this research, the historical context of bias in technology, and some potential solutions. But before we wrap up, I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on the novel notions segment, where we explore some potential extensions of this research and imagine what the future might hold.
Yes, I'm excited to share some ideas that I think build upon this research in interesting ways. What if we could take this concept of bias detection a step further? Imagine a world where AI models are trained not just to generate images, but to actively critique them for potential bias.
Wow, that's next level. So instead of just spitting out an image based on a prompt, the AI could analyze its own creation and say, hold on, this image perpetuates a harmful stereotype. Let me adjust it to be more inclusive.
Exactly. It's like having a built-in ethics advisor for AI image generation. And imagine the possibilities this could be integrated into design tools, prompting users to consider diversity and representation before even publishing their work.
Welcome back to the final part of our Talk Tensors deep dive, where we've been unpacking this fascinating research paper on stable diffusion and its tendency to generate stereotypical images of software engineers. We've covered a lot of ground, from the nitty-gritty details of the study itself to the historical context of bias in technology, and even some exciting, if slightly daunting, novel notions for the future.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. And now I think it's time to shift gears and focus on what this all means for you, our listeners.
Right.
What are the key takeaways from this research, and what actions can we take both individually and collectively to address this challenge of bias in AI?
Yeah, let's get practical. We've explored the problem, we've acknowledged the potential consequences, and we've even brainstormed some ambitious solutions. But what can we do right now to make a difference?
Well, I think the first step is to simply be aware of the issue. We often think of AI as this objective neutral force, but this research clearly demonstrates that even the most sophisticated algorithms can inherit and amplify the biases that exist in the data they're trained on.
It's like the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. If we feed biased data into an AI system, we can't expect unbiased results. So awareness is key. We need to be critical consumers of AI-generated content, always questioning the assumptions and biases that might be lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly. Don't just accept what you see at face value. Ask yourself, who created this image? What data was it trained on? Whose perspectives are being represented and whose are being excluded?
These are such important questions, and I think this critical awareness needs to extend beyond just the images themselves. We need to be mindful of how these AI-generated images are being used in different contexts. Are they reinforcing harmful stereotypes? Are they contributing to a lack of diversity in certain fields? Are they shaping our perceptions in ways that we might not even be aware of?
You're hitting on some crucial points. It's not enough to just critique the images themselves. We need to consider the broader social impact of how they're being deployed.
Okay, so awareness is a great starting point, but what about action? What concrete steps can we take to address this issue of bias in AI?
Well, for those of you involved in developing or training AI models, there are a few key things to keep in mind. First and foremost, be mindful of the data you're using. Actively seek out diverse and representative data sets that challenge existing biases.
It's like building a house. If you only use one type of brick, your house is going to look pretty monotonous. But if you use a variety of bricks, shapes, and colors, you can create something truly unique and beautiful.
I love that analogy, and it applies perfectly to AI development. The more diverse your data, the more robust and equitable your model will be.
Okay, so diverse data is crucial, but what about those of us who aren't directly involved in AI development? What can we do to make a difference?
Well, one powerful action is to simply speak up. If you see an AI-generated image that you believe is perpetuating harmful stereotypes or excluding certain groups, don't be afraid to call it out. Share your concerns on social media, write to the company or organization responsible, or even start a conversation with your friends and family.
It's about using our voices to challenge the status quo and demand better from the technologies that are shaping our world.
Exactly. And this can also extend to supporting organizations and initiatives that are working to promote fairness and inclusivity in AI. There are a growing number of groups dedicated to researching bias in AI, developing ethical guidelines, and advocating for more responsible development practices.
That's great to hear. It's encouraging to know that there are people actively working to address this issue. And for our listeners who are interested in learning more about these organizations, we'll include some links in the show notes.
Perfect. And remember, this is an ongoing conversation. The field of AI is constantly evolving, and so are the challenges and opportunities related to bias. It's up to all of us to stay informed, engage in critical thinking, and work together to ensure that these powerful technologies are used for good.
Okay, so we've talked about awareness action and the importance of ongoing dialogue, but before we wrap up, I want to touch on one final takeaway, which is the power of hope.
I love that you brought that up. It can be easy to get discouraged when we confront the complexities of bias in AI, but it's important to remember that we have the power to change things.
Exactly. This research isn't meant to make us feel helpless. It's meant to empower us to act by understanding the problem, acknowledging its potential consequences, and actively working to mitigate bias. We can shape the future of AI in a way that benefits everyone.
Well said. It's about harnessing the incredible potential of AI while also being mindful of its limitations and actively working to ensure that it's used ethically and responsibly.
And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the world of AI bias. We hope this episode has given you a new perspective on this important issue and inspired you to take action.
Remember, the future of AI is not predetermined. It's a story that we are all writing together. So let's make it a story of progress, inclusivity, and hope.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of AI. Happy deep diving.